So in Ubisoft's recent conference call, we learned a lot about how the company did at the end of last year especially, and as it turns out, they had a good quarter. But we don't care about that, nor do I really care about most things discussed at this conference call. However, we also learned that Assassin's Creed Valhalla has broken launch records, and Ubisoft is praising the transition to the RPG model for that. The reason being, there's a lot of people buying and playing Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey even now. But the main thing is Assassin's Creed Valhalla is the biggest Assassin's Creed launch in history, and the second best selling game on the next generation consoles. So here's what that more than likely means. The RPG format for Assassin's Creed is here to stay. Bollocks. If anyone out there was hoping for a return to the old Assassin's Creed style of a more focused action-adventure approach, as much as it was a noble hope and I preferred that format myself, it would also have been naive to believe that Ubisoft would go anywhere other than where the money was. And to a reasonable extent, why shouldn't they? They're a business. That doesn't mean they don't take the piss with it. Microtransactions. But you know what I'm trying to say. If Assassin's Creed being an RPG is the best business move for Ubisoft, then I guess it makes sense as to why it would stick around. That doesn't necessarily mean that it'll keep everybody happy. In fact, I know that a lot of people will give up on the franchise just on the back of that news alone. Not in the sense that they go, oh no, this news, I'm not a fan now, suddenly. It's a case of Assassin's Creed hasn't been what they wanted it to be for a while. It hasn't been what it used to be for a while, and so they're just done. And I think that's reasonable. Of course, it's worth keeping in mind that nobody has confirmed that Assassin's Creed is going to stay an RPG, but if it's making Ubisoft money, why the f*** would they change it? For all the things I like about Origins and Valhalla, they're not good RPGs. I like Origins and Valhalla. I hate Odyssey with a passion, but we won't talk about that. But to me, the RPG format thus far has been a hindrance. Not on the sales, clearly, but the quality of what's in the actual game. I feel like Assassin's Creed has lost a huge chunk of its identity through the dumbing down of gameplay concepts in the RPG Assassin's Creed titles. Intricate parkour that used to be the franchise's main selling point is now nothing more than just wank. Stealth is now an unrewarding inconvenience that you see no benefits from using, so most players will just not. Most of the time, it doesn't even work, so most of the players who even want to use stealth would not bother. Even the combat isn't especially satisfying. You find yourself swinging at air more often than not, and while it has variation that might come close to resembling an actual gameplay system, it feels just like the other two elements that we discussed that just feel like a means to an end. And so my biggest issue with the Assassin's Creed RPG gameplay is it's turned it from something that used to be fun and engaging to something boring and sloggy. However, Assassin's Creed being a good Assassin's Creed game and being a good RPG are not necessarily two mutually exclusive things. They can in theory achieve both. It's not necessarily impossible. It's not likely, don't get me wrong, but I think it's worth talking about. And so instead of ineffectively ranting about the RPG format and how it needs to go away, we're going to talk a little bit about how Ubisoft can make an Assassin's Creed RPG that actually works as both Assassin's Creed and an RPG. Firstly, let's talk about what makes a good Assassin's Creed. Firstly, I feel like you need to play as an assassin, not some outsider looking in, not a hidden one, an assassin. Aren't hidden ones and assassins the same thing, I hear you ask? Yes, but also no. Hidden ones are proto-assassins, which means they're a great loophole to throw in a needless gimmick. I think by this point I've lost my patience for gimmicks, just let us play as an assassin. Secondly, we need a plot that isn't necessarily prioritizing the history all the time. It can be aided by the history, and at times it can aid the history. But what it shouldn't be is just the history. You don't want to get too far lost in the historical setting. It's a backdrop for what's happening, but the plot should also be its own thing that doesn't rely too much on what actually happened in real history to make sense. We don't need to be at the forefront of every single historical event that's happening. In fact, the coolest examples of Assassin's Creed using historical moments as influence on the plot are when those events are present and known, but you're not necessarily a direct influence on it. You may be using the cover of what's going on to get close to a target, or it may just simply be happening while you're doing something else. I feel like there's a huge difference between having a story that implies influence on history and a story where you are just doing history. The main narrative focus cannot be on the historical setting itself, because that's the shit that you can learn and read about wherever. You don't necessarily need a game to do that, especially when these games have discovery tours. Assassin's Creed used to function by presenting that, but presenting also a story that could have happened at the same time. And that story should be the priority, because that's the Assassin's Creed story. The world needs to be structured for Assassin's Creed gameplay. Yes, if you want to have a large map, you can do that, but the cities need to be dense, they need to be packed with stuff, and the parkour needs to feel like a viable means to get around. It can't just be a means to an end, it has to be a fun gameplay system unto itself. We need the freedom to be able to get creative with traversal, combining parkour and social stealth, and we need to be able to be in control of these movements as much as we can, and control the variations in the movement depending on what we're trying to achieve. It can't be set animations that you lock into, as it needs to make the player actually think about being efficient and find ways to achieve that. Social stealth needs to be a more viable approach to stuff. Credit to Valhalla, it is in the game, it's just useless. And I have no footage of it because I figured that out pretty quickly. We need denser crowds that we can blend with. We need crowds that move in patterns and go about their daily routines as opposed to being vacant in cities. We need sights, we need sounds, we need to feel rewarded for not messing with the atmosphere. And the best way to do this is by giving us an immersive world. This will come back up when we talk about what makes a good RPG, I'm sure. NPCs need routines, it needs to vary depending on the time of day. There need to be events that can sometimes cause distractions and openings. There need to be means to create distractions and stealthily kill your foes if you so wish to. There needs to be a detection system that gives you enough time to figure out what you want to do. And if you do find yourself being detected, you need to be able to run away without automatically getting your weapons out. And from there should be a thoughtful chase system that makes you prioritize breaking the line of sight and hiding. The world and setting need to be able to complement this with ease, otherwise the setting just isn't right for Assassin's Creed. A few other things being Assassin's Creed should always strive to uphold its overarching sense of mystery. I feel like they've prematurely peeled back the Isu mystery just a little bit too far. You can't dial it back now, but I feel like using the Isu to explain stuff needs to be a bit more sparse. Less randomly placed unexplained Isu gear, for example, would be a must. Great, we found Excalibur, nobody mentions it. We found Mjolnir in the middle of nowhere, nobody mentions it. We found Nodin's Ark in a rock, nobody mentions it. If you're going to put them there, at least give us a satisfying payoff of dialogue about them. The side content needs to serve a better narrative purpose in the sense that it doesn't really serve anyone but the player, often in Valhalla. It doesn't serve Eivor's story, it doesn't feel relevant at all, it doesn't even feel like it was done canonically. I feel that the side content needs to correlate more with the main plot in the sense that it's still optional but feels relevant and worthwhile. To top this entire first point off, if you aren't trying to make a good Assassin's Creed game in Assassin's Creed, then why the fuck are you still making Assassin's Creed? Because it makes the money, I guess, but come on. To answer the second question, what makes a good RPG? I feel like Ubisoft misunderstands what it means to be an RPG. It doesn't mean damage numbers flying off of enemies when you hit them. It doesn't mean ridiculous grinds or numerical leveling systems. It means role-playing game. So if Ubisoft are going to continue down the RPG route, which feels inevitable now, I think I'd recommend putting massive emphasis on immersion. I suppose it's quite difficult to do with Assassin's Creed when it's actually set in the modern day and you're just revisiting the memories of characters through an animus. But if there is one thing that this RPG trilogy of Assassin's Creed has sorely lacked, it's that feeling of being immersed. Granted, travelling across the dunes of Assassin's Creed Origins Ancient Egypt was great fun, but I didn't feel much beyond that. I didn't feel like I got lost in the world. I didn't feel like there was necessarily too much atmosphere to the point where it felt like a lived-in experience. Valhalla does actually achieve selling a more convincing world to you at some points, usually in cutscenes, usually in the mocapped cutscenes, which aren't really that common, but you can tell in those moments that if that was the entire game, it would be incredibly immersive. Throwing in the odd moment of pure atmosphere isn't enough to create a convincing world though. When I play other RPGs like Oblivion, Skyrim, Mass Effect, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, The Witcher 3 or Horizon Zero Dawn, while some manage it better and more easily than others, they all feel captivating and they don't feel like a game. They feel like an experience. With the Assassin's Creed RPGs, I never felt like it was anything but a game. An RPG, in my opinion, should strive to immerse you. You should feel like it's an actual, authentic world. You should be able to be convinced by its lore and characters. And every second of playing the game should have you soak in that atmosphere, and it needs to be strong. It may even help encourage the use of social stealth in certain scenarios, because you don't want to disrupt the atmosphere that's playing out in front of you. And if you achieve that, then that's both good as an RPG and as Assassin's Creed. There is a very big difference between finding yourself in a game's world and simply being on a game's world. I believe a commenter in one of my videos quite aptly put it like that the other day. Once you've got that immersion down, you can have all the other stuff that you want. Of course, it would be better if it wasn't just superficial RPG elements that loosely work because, well, it's an RPG. I feel like the biggest point is you need to be able to sell this world to players. It needs to feel interactable, it needs to feel immersive, engaging, not necessarily real, but the entire point of the genre is escapism, isn't it? Perhaps even more so than other genres. It needs to feel natural across the board, it can't be a grind. The gameplay systems need to function adequately and feel nice, smooth, and satisfying. As for the world size, it needs to be no bigger than necessary, rather than as big as remotely possible. As fun as big worlds can be, if there's nothing to fill them, what's the point? And when we find ourselves travelling across the world, we need to come away from it going, I feel like I had an experience there. Better yet, I've had an adventure. I feel like this is the biggest priority for an RPG. It's also worth mentioning that you shouldn't be building your games around the concept of selling microtransactions within them. I did a full video about that one, it'll be linked at the end. Realistically, there's nothing stopping Assassin's Creed from being both a good Assassin's Creed game and a good RPG, but Ubisoft doesn't seem too interested in doing that. Assassin's Creed Valhalla did okay at being a good Assassin's Creed game courtesy of Darby McDevitt and I'm sure a few other passionate members of the team, but I feel like Ubisoft as a company wants Assassin's Creed to be their leading cash cow, and they don't necessarily care whether or not it stays true to what it is. It's worth bearing in mind that nothing has stated outright that Assassin's Creed is going to keep this RPG format, but I think considering that conference call, there's a very good chance that this is not the last we've seen of Assassin's Creed RPGs. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but I don't think it's worth holding out hope for anymore. I'm not necessarily a fan of this, but I'm also aware that it hasn't been gotten right yet. Do we owe Ubisoft the patience to let them figure it out? When you're paying money, I guess not. But it's Assassin's Creed, it's a cockroach of gaming. You can't kill it. But unlike other consumer products with cockroach attributes such as Henry Hoover's or the Honda Jazz, this franchise's charm is well and truly dwindling. At least in my opinion. Of course, let me know what you think down in the comments section. Anyway, thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, I hope it's been insightful. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff if you so wish to. And with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, take care and goodbye.